If you are over 60 and you are still investing as if you are 35, you are not being brave. You are being careless. That is not how most people talk about money. But I have lived long enough to learn that politeness can be expensive. In the first half of life, you can survive a lot of financial mistakes. You can lose money, work harder, save again, and let time do some repair work for you. In the later innings, time stops being your employee and starts becoming your auditor. It asks a harder question, not how much upside can you chase, but how much damage can you still survive. That changes everything. When I was younger, a bad decision in the market could be corrected by patience. I could keep earning, I could keep compounding, I could buy more when prices were lower, and let the next decade clean up the mess. Most people over 60 do not have that luxury in the same form. They are not feeding a portfolio anymore. The portfolio is starting to feed them. And once that relationship flips, the rules flip with it. That is where many intelligent people get hurt. They spend 40 years learning how to build wealth. Then enter the one decade of life that requires a different game entirely, and they keep using the old playbook. They still chase excitement. They still stretch for return. They still want their money to prove something about them. And the market, which has no mercy for vanity, punishes them at exactly the wrong moment. So let me tell you how I think about safety. When the point is no longer to get rich, but to remain free, I think about a fortress. A fortress is not built for applause. It is not built to impress the neighbors. It is built to survive weather, time, pressure, and attack. A fortress does three things well. It protects what is inside. It generates enough internal stability to keep functioning when the outside world gets chaotic. And it is strong in the places that matter most, not decorated in the places that matter least. That is what a retirement portfolio should be. Most people do the opposite. They build a fa-fa-yad. They own things that look sophisticated. They reach for extra yield because a headline number flatters them. They buy products that sound safer than they are. They tell themselves that they are diversified because they own many tickers, when in truth they own many expressions of the same risk. Then the storm arrives, and they discover that they did not build a fortress at all. They built a beautiful house on weak soil. The first thing you have to understand is that there are no perfect shelters. There are only better structures and worse structures. Cash is not perfectly safe because inflation eats it while you sleep. Long bonds are not perfectly safe because rising rates can break their market value long before they mature. Stocks are not perfectly safe because fear can cut them in half, even when the businesses underneath them remain excellent. Real estate is not perfectly safe because it can become illiquid exactly when you need liquidity. So when I use the word safe, I do not mean riskless. I mean resilient. I mean assets with a long record of preserving purchasing power, paying you something predictable, and surviving more than one economic mood swing. That is a much more useful definition. The first wall of the fortress is Treasury inflation-protected securities. I know that does not sound glamorous. Good if you are over 60. Glamour is one of the most dangerous costs in finance. Glamour seduces people into confusing stimulation with security. I have made a great deal of money in my life by staying away from exciting stories when the math did not justify them. Retirees should be even more stubborn about that than I am. What matters about inflation-protected treasuries is not that they make you rich. What matters is that they defend your purchasing power while the world tries to quietly steal it. That theft does not arrive wearing a mask. It arrives wearing normalcy. Groceries cost a little more. Insurance costs a little more. Utilities cost a little more. Medical care costs a lot more. Then one day a retiree looks around and realizes that the money which once felt like enough now feels tight. Nothing catastrophic happened in a single week. The currency simply leaked value year after year. That is one of the ugliest ways to lose because it does not feel dramatic enough to trigger action. But it compounds into a meaningful decline in freedom. Inflation-protected treasuries are designed to answer that problem directly. The principle adjusts with inflation. Your base is not standing still while prices move around it. If inflation runs hotter than the headlines say, the instrument adapts. If inflation cools, you still retain the backing of the United States government. You are not betting on a charismatic founder. You are not betting on a turnaround. You are not betting on a multiple expansion. You are saying something much simpler. I want a meaningful portion of my capital sitting inside the strongest legal promise in the system. And I want that promise adjusted for the fact that prices do not stand still. That is the kind of sentence an older investor should learn to love. People underestimate how much psychological strength comes from that wall alone. When the foundation of your life is not being shaken by every market mood, you think better. You do not wake up and check your phone like a patient waiting for lab results. You stop turning every news cycle into a personal emergency. Safety creates better behavior, and better behavior creates better outcomes. That is true in marriage, in business, and in investing. Now, I can already hear the objection. But Warren, those securities are boring. Exactly. The later you get in life, the more you should value instruments that let you sleep at night and think clearly in the morning. You are not trying to win a cocktail party. You are trying to stay independent. There is a large difference between those two ambitions, and most financial pain comes from confusing them. The second wall of the fortress is high-quality, short, and intermediate duration credit, particularly from businesses that can actually meet their obligations without drama. This is where many people make one of the most expensive mistakes in retirement. They hear the word bond and think the job is done. They do not ask what kind of bond. They do not ask how long the duration is. They do not ask what happens if rates rise again, or if inflation stays sticky, or if refinancing stress shows up where nobody expected it. They just buy yield. That is not investing. That is appetite masquerading as prudence. I have seen this movie many times. A retiree gets frustrated with low income from safe assets, so he reaches a little, then a little more. Maybe he buys long duration paper because the yield is higher. Maybe he buys something with a respectable sounding label and a risk profile he has not actually studied. Maybe he buys a weak borrower because the coupon looks generous. At first it feels clever. Then the cycle turns and the asset that was purchased for comfort suddenly delivers discomfort right on schedule. I call this the yield trap. The yield trap tells you that income is all that matters. The truth is that reliable income after survival is what matters. If I offer you 6% with a meaningful chance of wrecking principal, and I offer you 4.5% with a much stronger chance of coming through intact, the better answer for an older investor is often the one that leaves more of your original capital alive. That sounds obvious, but people forget it the moment the bigger numbers start smiling at them. A fortress is not built from the highest yielding bricks. It is built from the strongest bricks. So I prefer high-grade obligations from companies with stable cash flows, strong balance sheets, durable demand, and management teams that do not treat leverage like a personality trait. I would rather own the promise of a disciplined enterprise than the fantasy of a desperate one. The older you get, the less tolerance you should have for fragility, disguised as opportunity. There is another trap hidden here, and it is one most retirees do not see until it hurts them. I call it the duration trap. The duration trap is what happens when someone buys a long promise in a world where the value of promises is moving around violently. If rates rise, long-duration instruments get punished hard. What looked steady becomes unstable. What was supposed to provide ballast starts acting like a source of loss. Then the retiree feels confused because he thought he was in the safe part of the pool. He was not. He was standing in the shallow end wearing concrete boots. Shorter duration paper is less romantic and more useful. It matures sooner. It gives you the chance to reinvest at better rates if conditions change. It reduces the amount of time you are locked into a fixed arrangement while the macro world mutates around you. That flexibility matters. In every corner of finance, flexibility is underpriced until it becomes priceless. The third wall of the fortress is a carefully selected group of dividend-paying equities from businesses with durable demand and real pricing power. This is where people get confused because they hear the word stocks and imagine speculation. I am not talking about speculation. I am talking about partial ownership in businesses that continue doing necessary things through recessions, inflationary scares, rate cycles, elections, and all the other theater that keeps television anchors employed. People still brush their teeth in a downturn. They still turn on lights. They still buy basic household goods. They still need medicine. They still drink beverages. They have been drinking for decades. A business tied to ordinary recurring human behavior is worth more to me than one tied to an exciting forecast. That has been true for a very long time. When I speak about dividend-paying stocks for retirees, I am not speaking about anything with a high yield. High yield by itself can be a distress signal. A stock can show an attractive yield because the dividend is wonderful, or because the price has collapsed and the market is telling you trouble is coming. You have to know which one you are looking at. So I focus on a different set of questions. Can this business pass through cost increases without losing its customer base? Has it shown discipline across more than one cycle? Does it generate real cash rather than accounting perfume? Has it paid and ideally raised dividends for a long time? Does the business model depend on optimism, or does it depend on necessity? That distinction is everything. I call this the pricing power test. In an inflationary or unstable environment, pricing power is one of the cleanest forms of hidden protection. If costs rise and a company cannot pass them through, its margins get squeezed. If margins get squeezed, earnings disappoint. If earnings disappoint, the stock gets punished. But if a company sells something people keep buying and can nudge prices upward without serious demand destruction, then it protects its economics while weaker businesses absorb the damage. That is why I prefer the slow, obvious, unfashionable machine over the fast, exciting machine that only works in perfect weather. The market pays more than people realize for resilience. Now comes the identity shift that many people over 60 need but rarely articulate. In your 40s and 50s, you can still think like a builder. In your 60s and 70s, you must begin thinking like a steward. A builder asks, how much more can I add? A steward asks, how well can I protect, feed, and transfer what I already built? Those are not the same questions. A builder can afford a rough decade if he keeps earning. A steward may not get a rough decade back. That is why I have so little patience for the idea that older investors should keep swinging at every shiny pitch. At some point, your job is not to prove you can still sprint. Your job is to ensure the house does not burn down while you are asleep. This is where the sequence trap enters the picture, and it is one of the least understood dangers in retirement. Two people can own the exact same portfolio and face the exact same long-term average return, yet one ends up secure and the other ends up frightened. Why? Because the order of returns matters when withdrawals begin. A younger investor sees a market crash and thinks in accumulation terms. Lower prices mean future opportunity. A retiree sees the same crash, and, if he needs to pull money out to live, may be forced to sell assets at depressed prices. That sale is not just a paper loss, it becomes a permanent reduction in capital. Then if withdrawals continue while the portfolio is down, the mathematics get uglier. Fewer remaining shares are available to participate in the eventual recovery. The damage compounds in a way many people do not model until it is too late. This is why the fortress matters. If essential living expenses are largely covered by safer instruments and dependable income streams, you are less likely to be forced into destructive sales when markets are ugly. You preserve choice. Choice is the hidden asset people fail to value until they lose it. I have said for years that the best investment decision is often the one that keeps you from being forced into the worst investment decision. That principle becomes brutally important in retirement. Let me show you how I would think about the architecture. The first bucket is survival capital. This money is not there to impress anyone. It is there to pay for shelter, food, utilities, insurance, taxes, and the recurring costs of a civilized life. That bucket belongs in the strongest structures available. Inflation-adjusted treasuries belong here. Cash equivalents and short bills for immediate flexibility belong here. High-quality short-duration obligations belong here. This bucket is not where you try to be clever. The second bucket is stability income. This is where high-grade corporate credit and carefully selected dividend payers begin to matter. You want checks coming in from enterprises that are not likely to be knocked over by the first hard wind. You want diversification, but not diversification. You want enough positions to avoid single-name pain, but not so many that you end up owning a list instead of a thesis. The third bucket is measured growth. Yes, even older investors need growth because retirement can last a very long time and inflation never really takes a vacation, but growth in this stage must be earned through quality, not fantasy. That means businesses with durable economics, strong balance sheets, and products or services society continues buying in bad moods as well as good ones. The emphasis is not on maximum upside. The emphasis is on sensible compounding without fragility. That is a fortress. Not one wall, not one bet. 3 layers serving 3 distinct jobs. Now let me tell you what destroys fortresses. The first destroyer is reaching for yield. A retiree sees a product yielding twice as much as a treasury and starts imagining a more comfortable life. What he often does not imagine is why that extra yield exists. Usually it exists because the market is being paid to bear a risk. He has not measured honestly. Sometimes that risk is credit quality. Sometimes it is leverage. Sometimes it is illiquidity. Sometimes it is a business model that only looks stable until the next stress event arrives. I have watched people lose years of peace because they wanted an extra point or two of income from the wrong place. Never forget this. Extra yield purchased with impaired judgment is not extra income, it is deferred pain. The second destroyer is market timing. Older investors are often especially vulnerable to this because the stakes feel higher. They see headlines, feel fear, and want to do something. Then markets rebound without them, or they chase late after optimism has returned. That behavior turns normal volatility into a self-inflicted wound. I have spent a lifetime around markets, and I still think trying to dance in and out based on mood is a wonderful way to enrich your broker and confuse yourself. A fortress is designed before the attack, not during it. The third destroyer is concentration disguised as familiarity. People load up on what they know, their former employer, their home country, a sector that treated them well in the last cycle. They tell themselves that familiarity reduces risk. In fact, it often reduces objectivity. If one thing is paying many of your bills, the last thing you need is for that same thing to also dominate your financial assets. The fourth destroyer is tax neglect. A retiree who ignores taxes is like a shopkeeper who never counts shrinkage. The losses may not scream, but they accumulate. Which account holds which asset matters. How income is recognized matters. Withdrawal sequencing matters. Conversion opportunities matter. The structure around the portfolio can meaningfully improve or worsen the life the portfolio is supposed to support. The fifth destroyer is ego. This one causes more financial damage than bad math. Ego says I am too smart to need simplicity. Ego says boring is beneath me. Ego says I can outmaneuver the crowd because I was good at something else in life. Public markets do not care what you accomplished in medicine or engineering or law or business. They do not care how many people used to report to you. They do not care how right you were 10 times in a row. Markets charge tuition for arrogance, and the bill is highest when people are old enough that recovery time is scarce. If you want a calmer life, humility is a much better asset than confidence theater. There are also three concerns that deserve special respect in this stage of life. The first is inflation, which I have already touched, but not enough. Most people still treat inflation as a headline. It is not a headline, it is a long arithmetic process that quietly transfers comfort from savers to spenders and from the disciplined to the indebted. If the world is moving towards structurally higher fiscal deficits, more fragmented supply chains, and a less stable currency regime than the one people enjoyed for decades, then inflation is not a one-time inconvenience. It is a design constraint. Your fortress must be built with that in mind. The second is longevity. People are living longer, which is wonderful in every human sense and demanding in every financial sense. A retirement that lasts 30 years is not a short problem. It is an entire second adulthood. That means you cannot put everything into assets that feel safe today, but erode too much tomorrow. Safety without some growth becomes a trap of its own. Again, this is why a fortress needs layers. Pure defense can fail if it leaves you too exposed to time. Many retirees underestimate the optionality required for late life medical realities. Costs rise. Needs change. Care can get complicated quickly. If your whole plan assumes smooth expenses and no ugly surprises, it is not a plan. It is a wish. A proper fortress includes liquidity, redundancy, and enough margin that bad luck does not automatically become financial panic. When I look at people who age well financially, I notice a consistent pattern. They are not usually the ones telling the best stories at dinner about some spectacular investment. They are the ones whose financial lives became calmer over time. They own enough, they need less drama, they can help family without destabilizing themselves. They can absorb volatility without acting like every correction is a moral crisis. They are less dependent on any single outcome. That is what wealth was supposed to buy in the first place. Not noise, not status, not a more nervous version of abundance, freedom. That word matters more than return in the later innings. Freedom means you can pay your bills without resenting the news. Freedom means market volatility does not dictate your mood. Freedom means you are not calling your children because you stretched for yield and now need help. Freedom means you can be generous because your life is not standing on stilts. Freedom means you can say no. That is what a fortress buys. So if I were talking to someone over 60 and trying to simplify all of this into a usable operating system, I would say it this way. First, define the number that keeps your life standing, not your dream lifestyle, not the number for luxury. The real annual figure that keeps the lights on, The pantry full, the premiums paid, and the stress low, that number is sacred. It belongs under the strongest roof. Second, divide your assets by job, not by ticker symbol. Some money exists to preserve purchasing power. Some exist to generate dependable income. Some exist to provide measured long-term growth. Do not make one asset do all three jobs badly, when three categories can do them more intelligently together. Third, cut out anything you cannot explain in plain English. If the product requires a sales brochure longer than a short story and leaves you more impressed than clear, step back. Complexity often exists because someone is being compensated for your confusion. Fourth, build liquidity on purpose. 6 to 12 months of expenses in readily available form is not laziness. It is shock absorption. People make terrible decisions when they must act under pressure with no cash cushion. Fifth, rebalance with discipline. If one part of the fortress grows too large, trim it. If another part becomes too small, rebuild it. Maintenance is part of survival. A fortress ignored is only strong in memory. And finally, detach your self-worth from your portfolio's entertainment value. You are not less intelligent because your investments are boring. You are not less capable because you prefer resilience over fireworks. In the second half of life, quiet competence beats dramatic ambition almost every time. I want to say one more thing, and I say it because it is the part people feel but do not say aloud. A lot of older investors carry a private fear. They fear not poverty in the abstract, but humiliation. They fear becoming dependent. They fear outliving confidence. They fear that one or two bad decisions late in life could erase the dignity they spent decades building. That fear is real, and the cure is not denial. The cure is preparation. The cure is to stop pretending that the portfolio must keep behaving like it did during your prime earning years. The cure is to stop treating capital preservation as timidity. The cure is to recognize that there comes a point when avoiding irreversible mistakes is not a defensive goal. It is the highest form of wisdom. I have spent my whole life around capital. I love compounding. I love productive assets. I love the long game more than almost anybody alive. But the long game changes as the clock changes. The investor who refuses to adapt becomes a prisoner of an old identity. The investor who adapts becomes the steward of a better future. So here is the final question I would put in front of you. Are you still trying to build a casino, or are you finally willing to build a fortress? A casino asks for optimism, motion, and noise. A fortress asks for structure, patience, and honesty. A casino can feel alive right up until it empties your pockets. A fortress can look plain right up until the storm arrives and everybody suddenly understands its value. When you are over 60, your job is not to look clever during the sunshine. Your job is to remain standing after the weather turns. That is the test. That is the contract. That is the real work of staying rich.